My son and my daughter-in-law started laughing when I walked into the courtroom. It was a cold, calculated, cruel laugh. "Ha ha! Now we are going to leave her with nothing," I heard Jessica whisper to Caleb as they looked at me as if I were trash. I, Eleanor Vance, 71 years old, walked slowly toward the defendant's table, feeling every stare pinned to my back. They did not know one thing about me, one thing I had kept buried for years, ever since my retirement. And as soon as the judge walked in and looked at me, everything changed. His eyes went wide as saucers. He leaned forward. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance, it is you." But before getting to that moment, before the entire room turned inside out, I need you to understand how I got there. How my own son, the person I carried in my womb, whom I nursed, whom I raised alone after his father died, ended up being the man who wanted to leave me on the street. It all started 6 months ago, when Robert, my husband, passed away. We had been married for 48 years. 48 years of building a life together, of raising that house brick by brick, of saving every penny. When he died, something in me died too. I was left alone in that 3-bedroom house that smelled of his cigars, his cheap cologne, all our memories. Caleb showed up 3 days after the funeral. He did not come alone. He brought Jessica, that 35-year-old woman with a salesperson's smile and eyes that calculated everything as if she had a cash register in her head. They entered my house with bags of food, with hugs that felt hollow, with words that sounded too sweet. "Mom, you cannot stay alone," Caleb told me, while Jessica organized my kitchen without me asking her to. "You need help. You are not young anymore." I was 70 years old then. I felt tired, yes, devastated by the loss, but not incapable. However, when your only son looks at you with that mixture of pity and concern, when he tells you he just wants to take care of you, you start to doubt yourself. "I brought some documents," he said, pulling a brown folder from his briefcase. "I just need you to sign here and here. They are bank papers, so I can help you manage Dad's accounts. You know these things are complicated." Complicated? What an interesting word coming from him. Me, who had spent 35 years unraveling financial fraud, money laundering, corruption schemes involving millions of dollars. Me, who had made businessmen, politicians, and criminals in suits tremble. But at that moment, sitting in my kitchen with a broken heart over Robert's death, I signed. I signed without reading. I signed trusting my son. I signed sealing my own trap. The weeks passed like fog. Caleb and Jessica came over more and more often, always with the same song and dance. "Mom, I found these pills so you can sleep better. Mom, the doctor says you should take this for your nerves. Mom, you already forgot we talked about this yesterday." They started treating me as if I were losing my mind, as if every normal slip of memory for a 70-year-old woman was a sign of dementia, as if confusing Tuesday with Wednesday meant I could no longer take care of myself. One day a man arrived at my door. He introduced himself as Dr. Finnegan, a psychiatrist. He said Caleb had scheduled a routine evaluation. He asked me strange questions. He showed me drawings. He asked me to remember lists of words, all the while taking notes on a tablet, nodding with that expression doctors use when they have already decided on a diagnosis before starting. "Mrs. Vance, I see worrying signs of cognitive decline," he said at the end, without even looking me in the eye. "I am going to recommend that you have constant supervision." That same night, Caleb arrived with more papers. "Mom, the doctor says you need permanent help. Jessica and I have decided to move in here with you, to take care of you." They did not ask me, they decided. By the following week, they were already living in my house. Jessica took control of the kitchen, the keys, the telephone. "We do not want you to get tired, mother-in-law," she would tell me with that honeyed voice that made me grind my teeth. Strange people began to arrive. A male nurse who gave me pills 3 times a day. A woman who claimed to be a social worker and who checked every corner of my house taking notes. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. One afternoon I heard voices in the living room. I approached slowly, barefoot on the cold tiles. Caleb and Jessica were speaking in low voices, but not low enough. "How much do you think the house is worth?" asked Jessica. "At least $350,000, answered my son. My son, plus the savings accounts, the investments. We are talking about almost $500,000. And her? Dr. Finnegan already signed the report. Advanced senile dementia. With that, the judge will give us full conservatorship. Afterward. Well, there are very cheap nursing homes on the outskirts. They laughed, both of them, as if they were planning a vacation, and not the destruction of my life. Something inside me woke up at that moment, something that had been asleep since my retirement 6 years ago, a spark, a cold and calculated rage that I knew very well. That night, alone in my room, I stared at the ceiling for hours. I remembered who I was before being just Mom, before being just Robert's widow. I remembered the cases, the investigations, the criminals who thought they could fool me and ended up behind bars. Eleanor Vance, District Attorney, 35 years of service, 182 cases won, 0 defeats in major fraud cases. My son had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He had underestimated his own mother, and now, standing before that judge, who had just recognized me, watching Caleb's arrogant smile begin to fade, I knew the moment had come to remind the world who Eleanor Vance really was. The battle was just beginning. Judge Marcus Thorne remained standing in front of his chair, looking at me as if he had seen a ghost from his professional past. I remembered him perfectly. 15 years ago, he was a young lawyer just out of law school, working in the DA's office as my temporary assistant. I had personally trained him on a public funds embezzlement case involving half the city council. "Mrs. Vance," he repeated, almost in a whisper. "I cannot believe it is you." Caleb and Jessica exchanged confused glances. I saw my daughter-in-law's smug smile freeze on her face. My son leaned toward his lawyer, a fat guy in a brown suit who was sweating too much, and whispered something in his ear. "Your Honor," the lawyer intervened, standing up clumsily. "I understand that you may know Mrs. Vance, but precisely for that reason, you must understand the delicate situation she is in. A woman of her age, with evident mental deterioration, who needs protection and care. My client, her own son, only seeks the best for her." Marcus looked at him with an expression I knew very well. It was the same face he made when someone tried to sell him a poorly constructed lie. He sat down slowly, opened the case file, and began to read in silence. The silence in that room became so dense I could hear my own breathing. I remained silent, still, observing, as I had done 1,000 times before in rooms like this, but from the other side. "Let us see," the judge finally said. "According to this medical report from Dr. Finnegan, Mrs. Vance suffers from advanced senile dementia, frequent forgetfulness, temporal and spatial disorientation, and inability to manage her finances." He looked up at me. "Is this correct, Mrs. Vance?" Before I could answer, Jessica stood up. "Your Honor, with all due respect, she does not even remember what day it is. Yesterday, she asked me 3 times if she had already eaten breakfast. Last week, she went out to the street in her pajamas thinking she was going to church. She needs constant help." Lies. Every word was a perfectly rehearsed lie. But I still did not speak. It was not my moment yet. "Sit down, ma'am," Marcus ordered Jessica with a firm voice. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "Mrs. Vance, do you have legal representation at this hearing?" "No, Your Honor," I replied with a clear and firm voice. "I came alone." Caleb let out a short laugh, almost a snort. "Of course she came alone. She does not even know where she is standing." The judge banged his gavel once. Silence. "Mr. Vance, you will speak only when asked." He turned to me again. "Mrs. Vance, do you understand why you are here today?" "Perfectly, Your Honor. My son Caleb and his wife Jessica are petitioning for my legal interdiction. They want to declare me legally incompetent to manage my assets and my life. They want to keep my house, my savings, and lock me in some cheap nursing home while they enjoy what my husband and I built over almost 50 years of honest work." The silence that followed was absolute. Caleb turned pale. Jessica opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The lawyer was sweating even more, taking out a handkerchief to wipe his forehead. "I see that she is quite lucid," Marcus commented with a tone that almost seemed amused. "Tell me, what is today's date?" "Sunday, March 12th, 2024. It is 10:40 in the morning. This is the third courtroom of the county civil court. You are Judge Marcus Thorne, who worked under my supervision on the case against former Mayor Fernandez for diversion of public funds in the year 2009. We won that case. The former mayor served 8 years in prison. I saw Marcus suppress a smile. Caleb, on the other hand, looked as if he had been punched in the stomach. Your Honor, this is an act, the desperate lawyer intervened. She is having a moment of temporary lucidity. The medical report is clear. The medical report, I interrupted him, was prepared by a certain Dr. Finnegan, who evaluated me a single time for approximately 20 minutes in my own home, without any complementary studies, without a review of prior medical history, without blood tests, without an MRI, without absolutely any objective test to support his diagnosis. I took a thin folder out of my bag. My hands were no longer shaking. I had trained them for decades never to shake in front of a criminal. I have here, I continued, the results of a complete neurological evaluation performed 2 weeks ago by Dr. Sylvia Ross, a board-certified neurologist with 30 years of experience. It includes extensive cognitive analysis, brain imaging studies, and memory tests. Conclusion: normal cognitive function for my age. 0 signs of dementia. I extended the folder to the judge. Marcus took it and began to review it with attention. Caleb's lawyer turned red as a tomato. That is impossible. She cannot have done that alone. Someone is manipulating her. No one manipulates me, I said, staring at him. For 35 years, I was a district attorney, specialized in financial fraud and corruption. I investigated and prosecuted 182 criminals, businessmen, politicians, corrupt lawyers. I paused. Ungrateful children who scammed their own parents. Jessica stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. She is acting. Your Honor has to see how she is at home. She forgets everything. She cannot even prepare breakfast by herself. Curious, I replied calmly. Because the pills you gave me 3 times a day, the same ones that were supposedly for my nerves, I sent them to be analyzed. Do you know what they contained? Benzodiazepines, in doses high enough to keep any person in a state of permanent confusion. The same pills that produce the exact symptoms you needed me to show. The hit was direct. Jessica froze, her mouth open. Caleb looked away. That is a very serious accusation, Mrs. Vance, Judge Marcus said. But his tone was not one of reproach. It was that of a prosecutor. He was waiting for my evidence. I have the complete toxicological analysis, I said, performed by the Martinez and Associates Forensic Laboratory, the same lab we used in the DA's office for criminal cases. The pills were identified as diazepam, 10 milligrams, a dose far superior to any normal treatment for anxiety, enough to produce disorientation, short-term memory problems, difficulty concentrating. I took another document out of my bag. This time, Caleb stood up. Mom, stop. You are sick. You do not know what you are saying. Sit down, Mr. Vance, the judge ordered with a hard voice. Now, my son let himself fall into his chair. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I had not seen before. Fear. Real fear. But this was just beginning. They did not know even half of what I had discovered. They did not know that for the last 2 months, while they believed me drugged and confused in my room, I had been investigating every move they made, every bank account, every forged document, every lie. They had awakened the prosecutor who had been asleep for 6 years. And that prosecutor never, ever lost a case. Judge Marcus took the documents I had handed him and reviewed them in silence for what seemed like hours, although it was probably only minutes. I remained standing, calm, with my hands crossed over my bag. I had learned a long time ago that in a courtroom, calm is power. He who loses composure loses the case. Caleb and Jessica, on the other hand, seemed about to explode. My daughter-in-law kept shaking her leg nervously. That tick that appears when people know they are trapped. My son stared at the wall, jaw clenched, as if he could make all this disappear just by wishing it hard enough. Mr. Vance, the judge finally said, according to the documents your mother just presented, there is evidence that she was systematically medicated without a legitimate medical prescription. Do you have anything to say about this? The fat lawyer stood up before Caleb could speak. Your Honor, My client acted in good faith, following the recommendations of Dr. Finnegan. If there was any error in the medication, it was a medical misunderstanding, not a malicious action. A misunderstanding, I repeated with a soft but clear voice. What an interesting way to describe a systematic poisoning. That is defamation, Jessica shouted, standing up. You cannot accuse us of that. We just wanted to help her. Sit down, Marcus ordered again, and this time his voice had a cutting edge. This is the last time I say it. The next person who stands up without permission will be removed from the courtroom. Jessica sat down, but I could see her hands shaking. Good. Let her tremble. Let her feel a fraction of the fear they made me feel for months. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Vance, I understand you have more evidence to present. That is correct, Your Honor. I took another folder out of my bag. This old bag that Jessica always looked at with contempt, calling it that ugly old lady thing, contained the complete destruction of her plans. I would like to present copies of the bank movements of my accounts during the last 6 months. I handed him the documents. Marcus began to review them, and I saw his eyebrows raise with each page. I see transfers here for significant amounts. $20,000 in January, $35,000 in February, $40,000 in March. He looked up at Caleb. Can you explain these movements? Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. They were necessary expenses for my mother's care. Medications, medical consultations, the private nurse. Lie, I said simply. There was no private nurse. The man who came to the house was Valentine Stone, an unemployed actor whom Jessica hired for $500 a week to pose as a nurse. I have his sworn affidavit right here, signed before a notary 3 days ago. The silence that fell over the room was so heavy it could almost be touched. Caleb turned pale. Jessica opened her eyes so wide it looked like they were going to pop out of their sockets. Valentine had the decency to feel guilty, I continued. When I explained to him what was really happening, when I showed him that it was not a simple acting job but participation in fraud, he decided to cooperate. He told me everything, how Jessica trained him to give me the pills, how he had to write things in a fake folder to make it look like a real medical history, how he had to tell visitors that I was having a bad day every time someone came to see me. I took out more papers. With every document I put on that table, I saw my son's castle of lies crumble brick by brick. I also have the phone records, calls between Jessica and the alleged Dr. Finnegan. 53 calls in 3 months. Do you know what is interesting, Your Honor? I investigated Dr. Finnegan. It turns out he lost his medical license 4 years ago for falsifying diagnoses in exchange for money. He is prohibited from practicing. Any document he signs has absolutely no legal validity. Caleb's lawyer stood up, completely red. Your Honor, I object. This is a circus. Mrs. Vance is clearly being advised by someone. A woman of her age cannot have investigated all this alone. I laughed. I could not help it. It was a short, dry laugh, without humor. A woman of my age? I repeated. You are right about something. At my age, with my experience, this was even easier than I thought. Do you know how many cases like this I investigated during my career? Ungrateful children and relatives scamming the elderly, declaring them incompetent to rob them. I prosecuted at least 20 identical cases. I know every trick, every lie, every fake document that can be used. I turned to Caleb, my son, the person who was once a sweet boy who brought me flowers from the garden, the boy who cried when he saw sad movies, the young man who swore on his father's grave that he would always take care of me. When did you turn into this? I asked him, and for the first time, my voice trembled slightly. When did you stop being my son and become a criminal? He did not answer. He did not look at me. He just clenched his fists on the table. But Jessica did speak. All this is a lie. She is making things up. She is paranoid, sick. You want to talk about lies, Jessica? I interrupted her. Let us talk about your lies. Let us start with your real name. I saw the color disappear completely from her face. Your name is not Jessica Sterling. Your real name is Jessica Sandoval. You have 2 more identities in other states. In Texas, you are Patricia Morales. In Arizona, you are Vanessa Santos. In each state, you married older men or sons of wealthy families. In each state, Those men or their families ended up in legal proceedings similar to this one, accused of mental incapacity, stripped of their assets. I took out photographs. Photos that my friend Maggie had obtained through her contacts in other DA offices. Jessica with different men, at different weddings, with different names. In Texas, Mr. William Cooper, 82 years old, was declared incompetent after marrying you. He died 6 months later, in a seedy nursing home. You kept his ranch valued at $800,000. In Arizona, the Mendoza family lost their family business after their son married you. Do I need to continue? Jessica jumped up, knocking her chair backward. That is ridiculous. You cannot prove any of that. I can prove everything, I said calmly. I have copies of the marriage certificates. I have the court judgments. I have testimonies from the families you destroyed. And most interestingly, I have the photographs from your social media profiles where you brag about your successful real estate business. Real estate you obtained by scamming the vulnerable. Judge Marcus banged his gavel. Enough. I am going to request a 30-minute recess. Mrs. Vance, do you have more evidence to present? Yes, Your Honor, much more. Then prepare to present it when we resume. And I suggest the defense consult very seriously with their clients about the gravity of this situation. When the judge left, Caleb finally looked at me. There were tears in his eyes, but I do not know if they were of regret or of rage, because I had discovered him. Mom, he whispered. Why are you doing this? I stared at him, unblinking. Why am I doing this? The correct question is, why you did it? Why did you try to destroy your own mother for money? I did not wait for his answer. I turned around and walked out of the room with my head held high. I still had ammunition stored, and in the second part of this hearing, I was going to use every bullet. I walked out of the courtroom and headed toward the hallway, where there was a row of green plastic chairs. I sat down slowly, feeling my knees creak. However strong I appeared in there, my 71-year-old body reminded me of its limits. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Eleanor. I opened my eyes. Standing in front of me was Maggie Dubois, my old partner from the DA's office. She wore an impeccable cream-colored suit, her gray hair pulled back in a perfect bun, and that sharp look she always had. The woman who had been my right hand for 15 years, the person I trusted most in the whole world. Maggie, I said, and I could not help my voice sounding tired. Thanks for coming. Do you think I was going to miss it? She replied, sitting next to me. When you called me 2 months ago saying your own son was scamming you, I knew this was going to be big, but what you just did in there. She shook her head with a smile. That is you, the Eleanor Vance I knew, the one who made the most dangerous criminals tremble. She handed me a new manila folder. This is what you asked for. The complete records of Jessica Sandoval, alias Patricia Morales, alias Vanessa Santos. I contacted my colleagues in Texas and Arizona. They are more than happy to cooperate. That woman has left a trail of destroyed families all over the country. I opened the folder. Inside were documents, more photographs, sworn affidavits. It was pure dynamite. There is something else, Maggie continued in a lower voice. I investigated your son, too. Eleanor, I am so sorry, but you need to know this. My heart raced. What did you find? Caleb has been in serious financial trouble for the last 2 years. His law firm is on the verge of bankruptcy. He owes more than $200,000 in gambling debts. He has 3 loans he hasn't paid. The house he supposedly bought with Jessica is actually mortgaged to the hilt. They are desperate for money. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. My son, the successful lawyer who always bragged about his important cases, his corporate clients, was ruined. And he had seen his own mother as the solution. He met Jessica a year ago, Maggie continued. In a casino. She approached him, supposedly by chance, but I do not believe in coincidences. Eleanor, I think she investigated him, knew about his debts, knew you had a paid-off house and considerable savings, and she seduced him with a plan to steal everything from me. I finished the sentence. Exactly. And the worst part is, you are not the first. As you saw in the documents, Jessica has experience. This is what she does. She finds desperate men with elderly parents or relatives with money. She convinces them that the only way out is to take everything from those relatives. She marries them, they execute the plan, they divorce quietly after dividing the loot, and she disappears with a new identity. I stared at the photographs of Jessica with those other men. In all of them, she was smiling, beautiful, charming, a predator with the face of an angel. Mr. Cooper from Texas, Maggie pointed to a specific photo, died under suspicious circumstances, sudden cardiac arrest 6 months after being institutionalized. No one investigated thoroughly because he was already very old. But his daughter always maintained that her father was healthy before meeting Jessica. A chill ran down my spine. Do you think she? I do not have proof, but I have suspicions. And now that we know she was drugging you systematically, that she had complete access to your food, to your medications. Eleanor, if you hadn't woken up when you did, you would have kept taking those pills for a few more months. She didn't finish the sentence. There was no need. I got up and walked to the hallway window. Down below, in the parking lot, I could see Caleb's car, a silver Mercedes that was probably also financed with debt. Everything in his life was a lie, a shiny facade hiding rot. Do you know what is most painful about all this? I said without turning around. It is not the money, it is not the house. It is that my own son looked me in the eye for months, saw me confused by the drugs they gave me, saw me scared, vulnerable, and felt nothing. No remorse, no hesitation. He just went ahead with the plan. Maggie walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. I know it hurts, but now you have to be strong. You have to finish this. Not just for you, but for all of Jessica's other victims, for all the families she destroyed. She was right. This was no longer just about me. It was about justice. The recess ended, and we went back into the courtroom. This time there were more people. Maggie sat in the front row behind me. I also saw Betty, my neighbor, the woman Caleb and Jessica had tried to use as a witness to my alleged dementia. But what they did not know was that Betty and I had been friends for 20 years. And Betty had very valuable information. When Judge Marcus returned, his expression was serious. He had reviewed the documents I gave him. He knew exactly what he had on his hands now. Let us resume the session, he announced. Mrs. Vance, you may continue presenting your evidence. I stood up. Your Honor, I would like to call a witness. Mrs. Betty Miller, my neighbor for 20 years. Betty stood up and walked to the front. She was sworn in and sat on the stand. Caleb looked at her nervously. Jessica had her jaw clenched. Mrs. Miller, I began. You live in the house next to mine, correct? That is right. We have been neighbors since you and Robert moved into the neighborhood. And have you observed what has been happening at my house over the last few months? Betty nodded. Yes, I have seen how your son and daughter-in-law moved in with you, how they started controlling everything, how you stopped going out for walks in the mornings, something you did every day without fail. Did you notice anything else? Yes, one night, about 6 weeks ago, I heard shouting, raised voices. I looked out my window and saw Jessica taking boxes out of your house. Mrs. Vance. Big boxes that she loaded into a van. The next day I asked you about those boxes, and you told me you did not know what I was talking about. What was in those boxes? I asked. I did something I maybe shouldn't have done, Betty admitted, but I was worried about you. I took photographs, and the next day, when I saw the van was still parked on the street, I went over and looked through the window. It was your things, Mrs. Vance. Your jewelry, your photo albums, the porcelain dinnerware set Robert gave you for your anniversary, your books, everything. Jessica stood up abruptly. That is invasion of privacy. Those were things we were going to store in a storage unit to protect them. Protect them? I said, turning to her. Or sell them? Because I have here the records from a pawn shop where you sold my pearl necklace, the one that belonged to my grandmother, for $1,200. I have the receipt. It is in your name. I passed the document to the judge. Caleb sank into his chair. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear. You also sold my wedding ring, I continued, feeling the rage grow in my chest. The ring Robert put on my finger 48 years ago. You sold it for $800 to pay my son's casino debts. That is not true, Jessica shouted, but her voice sounded desperate now, not indignant. I have the security footage from the pawn shop. It clearly shows you selling my jewelry. 3 different visits. A total of $11,000 in items of sentimental value that were priceless to me. The judge banged his gavel. Mrs. Jessica Vance, sit down immediately or I will have you removed from this courtroom. Jessica sat down, but I could see her whole body shaking. The walls were closing in on her, and I still had more, much more. Because during those 2 months of pretending to be drugged and confused, I had been doing what I did best: investigating, documenting, building an airtight and unappealable case. My son and my daughter-in-law had completely underestimated me. They had seen a vulnerable old woman and thought it would be easy. They did not know they were trying to scam the most feared prosecutor in the history of this county, and now they were going to pay for every lie, for every betrayal, for every tear they made me shed. After Betty's testimony, Judge Marcus called another 15-minute recess. This time, when I walked out of the room, I saw something I will never forget. Caleb was in a corner of the hallway, hands on his head, while Jessica yelled at him in a low but furious voice. I got close enough to listen. I told you this was too risky. I told you to investigate your mother better before starting all this, hissed Jessica with poison in every word. But no, you were so sure. She is just a little old lady, you said. Look where we are now. You were the one who planned everything, Caleb replied, raising his voice. You told me exactly what to say, what documents to forge, whom to hire. This was your idea from the beginning. I stopped there, listening to my son blame his wife, listening to their marriage of lies crumble in real time. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for him. Part of me wanted to go over and tell him he could still fix this, that he could tell the truth and maybe, just maybe, find a way back. But then I remembered their laughter when I entered the room. I remembered how they looked at me like trash. I remembered the nights I spent confused, drugged, scared in my own house. And that part of me that wanted to forgive died completely. Maggie appeared at my side, ready for the next round. More than ready, I replied. It is time to show them the rest. We went back into the room. The atmosphere had changed completely. At first, Caleb and Jessica entered confident, almost arrogant. Now they entered like condemned prisoners walking toward their execution. The fat lawyer was sweating so much he had soaked the collar of his shirt. When Judge Marcus sat down, he looked directly at me. Mrs. Vance, I understand you have more evidence to present. Yes, Your Honor. I would like to present documents related to the finances of my son and his wife. The lawyer stood up immediately. Objection. My client's finances are not relevant to this case. They are absolutely relevant, I replied before the judge could speak, because they demonstrate the motive behind all this fraud. They demonstrate why they decided to destroy their own mother. Marcus nodded. Objection overruled. Proceed, Mrs. Vance. I took out another folder. This one was thicker than the previous ones. Caleb Vance has debts totaling $217,000. He has 3 overdue loans with different banks. He owes $58,000 to a casino in Atlantic City. His law firm has lost 80% of its clients in the last year due to professional negligence and ethical complaints. I passed the documents to the judge one by one. Bank statements, collection notices, pending lawsuits. My son's financial life laid out like a corpse on an autopsy table. His house is mortgaged for 120% of its value. His car is 3 months away from being repossessed. And 4 months ago, right before my husband's death gave them this opportunity, he received a notification from the Bar Association warning him that he was under investigation for embezzlement of client funds. Caleb did not look up. He kept his head down, defeated. Now let us talk about Jessica, I continued. Or should I say Jessica Sandoval, because that is her real name. Jessica is not a lawyer, as she told my son. She never studied law. She never went to college. What she does have is a criminal record in 3 different states. Jessica turned pale as paper. In California, she was arrested for fraud in 2016. The charges were dropped on a legal technicality. In Nevada, she was investigated for the suspicious death of a 75-year-old man she had married 2 months earlier. Without sufficient evidence, the case was closed. In Texas, as I already mentioned, there is the case of William Cooper, another elderly man dead under strange circumstances after marrying her. I took out photographs. Mugshots of Jessica with different names, different hairstyles, but always the same cold and calculating look. What Jessica does is simple but effective. She looks for men in financial trouble who have elderly relatives with money. She seduces them. She convinces them that the only solution is to take everything from those relatives. She plans every detail. The fake medical documents, the medications to create confusion, the social isolation of the victim. Then they execute the plan, get the money, and she disappears with a new identity. Maggie stood up from her seat in the audience. Your Honor, I am Margaret Dubois, former state prosecutor. I have been helping Mrs. Vance in her investigation. I have contacts in Texas, Arizona, and California, confirming everything she is saying. I also have sworn affidavits from 2 families who were victims of the same scheme. The judge looked at her in surprise. Prosecutor Dubois, I remember you. You worked several important cases years ago. That is correct, Your Honor. And I can assure you that what you are seeing here is a clear and documented criminal pattern. Jessica Sandoval is a professional predator, and Caleb Vance, unfortunately, is her most recent accomplice. Marcus turned to Caleb's lawyer. Does your client have anything to say in his defense? The lawyer looked at Caleb, waiting for instructions. My son finally looked up. We looked at each other for the first time in the whole hearing. Really looked at each other. I saw his red eyes, maybe from held-back tears, maybe from rage. I was not sure, and I no longer cared. I have nothing to say, murmured Caleb. I do have something to say, Jessica interrupted, standing up abruptly. All this is a farce. She is a bitter old woman who cannot accept that her son rebuilt his life. She is making all this up because... Because what? I interrupted her with a voice of ice. Because I discovered you were trying to kill me slowly? Because I found the insulin syringes hidden in your purse. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Jessica froze, her mouth open. Yes, I continued. I found the syringes, fast-acting insulin. I am not diabetic. I never have been. But you had 4 syringes full of insulin hidden in your room. What did you need them for, Jessica? What was your next step? To cause me hypoglycemic shock that would look like a natural stroke, just like happened to Mr. Cooper in Texas? That is ridiculous. You cannot prove it. I can prove everything. I took out photographs of the syringes. I found them 3 weeks ago. I documented them. I sent them to be analyzed. They are exactly what I say they are. And the forensic lab confirmed that the fingerprints on the syringes are yours. Jessica began to back away, shaking her head. No, that does not prove anything. I also have the recordings, I said with deadly calm. Remember when you thought I was asleep in my room, drugged like every night? I was not always asleep, Jessica. Sometimes I just pretended. And I recorded your conversations with my son. I recorded when you discussed how much longer you should wait. I recorded when you said it was better to speed up the process because I was taking too much time to die naturally. I took out my cell phone, a device they always told me was too complicated for me, that would confuse me more. That same phone I hid under my pillow and used to record every incriminating conversation. I passed the phone to the judge. Your Honor, there are 16 recordings in total. In number 7, which lasts 3 minutes and 40 seconds, Jessica tells Caleb exactly how she plans to use the insulin. In number 12, they discuss what to do with my body afterward. In number 14, Jessica mentions that, quote, this worked perfectly in Texas, unquote. Judge Marcus's face turned hard as stone. He took the phone and began to listen. I saw his expression go from serious to horrified. After 2 minutes, he stopped the recording. Bailiff, he said with a controlled voice but trembling with contained fury, call the police, now. Jessica tried to run, literally tried to escape the courtroom, but the bailiff stopped her before she reached the door. He held her while she screamed, kicked, threw senseless accusations. Caleb did not move. He stayed seated, hands on the table, staring at nothing. Broken, destroyed, trapped in a web of his own creation. Mr. Vance, the judge said, you have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. This is no longer a civil case. This is attempted murder, aggravated fraud, criminal conspiracy. I am going to order your immediate arrest. 2 police officers entered the room. I do not know how they arrived so fast. Maybe the bailiff had already called them. Maybe Maggie had anticipated this would end like this. They handcuffed Jessica first. She kept screaming, blaming me for ruining her life, saying I was a vengeful witch. Her screams faded as they took her down the hallway. Then they approached Caleb. He raised his hands without resistance. Before they handcuffed him, he looked at me one last time. "I am sorry, Mom," he whispered. I did not answer. There was nothing to say. The boy I had raised died a long time ago. The man in front of me was a stranger who had tried to kill me for money. They took him away. And I was left alone in that courtroom, standing, victorious but devastated. I had won. I had destroyed their plan completely. I had protected my life, my house, my dignity. But I had lost my son forever. When the room emptied, I remained seated in silence. Judge Marcus had suspended the hearing indefinitely, while the police processed the criminal charges against Caleb and Jessica. Maggie walked over and sat next to me without saying anything. Sometimes silence is the best comfort. "You did the right thing," she finally said. "I know," I replied, but my voice sounded hollow. "Then why do I feel like this?" "Because he was your son. And however monstrous he may have become, a part of you still remembers the child he was." She was right. I closed my eyes and saw flashes of memories. Caleb at 5 years old, bringing me drawings from school. At 10, hugging me when I cried at my mother's funeral. At 18, swearing to be a good man like his father. At what moment did all that go wrong? At what moment did money and desperation turn him into someone capable of killing his own mother? "You need to go home," Maggie said softly. "You need to rest." "I cannot go back to that house yet," I admitted. "It is full of them. Of their things, of their lies, of everything they did. Then come to mine. I have a guest room. You can stay as long as you need." I accepted her offer because I did not have the strength to argue. We left the courthouse together. Outside there were reporters. I do not know how they found out so fast, but there they were, with cameras and microphones, shouting questions. "Mrs. Vance, is it true your son tried to kill you?" "Mrs. Vance, how do you feel after exposing your own family?" Maggie protected me from the harassment, leading me quickly to her car. As we drove away, I saw in the rearview mirror how the reporters kept filming. Tomorrow my face would be on all the news. The retired prosecutor who discovered her own son's murder plot. A perfect headline, a tragedy packaged for public consumption. That night, at Maggie's house, I could not sleep. I stared at the ceiling of the guest room, thinking about everything I had discovered during my investigation, because the truth was even darker than what I had revealed in court. 2 weeks before the hearing, while I continued pretending to be drugged and confused, I heard another conversation. It was late at night. Caleb and Jessica thought I was deeply asleep thanks to the pills they had given me with dinner. But I had learned to hide the pills under my tongue and spit them out when they left. They were in the living room, drinking wine, talking in low voices. I crawled silently down the hallway until I could hear them better. "How much longer do we have to wait?" asked Caleb with frustration. "The creditors are pressuring me. I need the money now." "Relax," replied Jessica, with that silky voice she used when she manipulated him. "It is almost all over. Once the judge declares her incompetent, we transfer everything to your name, and then, well, accidents happen, especially with frail old people." "I do not know if I can do it," muttered Caleb. "She is my mother." "Your mother, who has $450,000 that you desperately need. Your mother who is living comfortably while you sink in debts. Is that fair? You are her only son. That money should be yours anyway." I heard how Jessica convinced him, word by word, that killing me was the logical solution. I heard how my son, little by little, stopped resisting. I heard the exact moment he crossed the line between fraud and premeditated murder. "Okay," he finally said, "but it has to look natural. A stroke, a cardiac arrest, something that does not raise suspicions." "Leave it to me," replied Jessica. "I have experience in this." That was the night I knew I wasn't just dealing with fraud. I was dealing with murderers. And that was the night I decided to record everything. The next day, while they went out to run errands, I searched the whole house. I found the insulin syringes hidden in the secret compartment of Jessica's purse. I found documents showing they had already contacted a funeral home to plan in advance. I found searches on Caleb's computer about death by natural causes in the elderly and how to avoid autopsies. I also found something else, something that chilled my blood. In Jessica's closet, hidden inside a shoebox, was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were newspaper clippings, all about the death of Mr. William Cooper in Texas. But they were not just informational articles. They were articles Jessica had marked with highlighter, notes in the margins, as if she were studying her own crime to perfect it. Autopsy not performed, family did not request, said a note written in her handwriting. Immediate cremation, no investigation, said another. Sole heir by will modified 2 weeks prior. It was underlined 3 times. Jessica had kept evidence of her own previous murder. Whether out of arrogance or nostalgia for her success, she had kept a complete record of how she had killed Mr. Cooper and got away with it. I photographed everything, every document, every note, every clipping. Then I put everything exactly how I had found it. They never knew I had discovered their little museum of horrors. Now, lying in Maggie's house, I thought about all the things I had not yet revealed in court. I had saved them strategically, because I knew this would not end with a simple civil hearing. I knew this would turn into a criminal case, and when that moment arrived, I would have to present even more compelling evidence. My phone rang, startling me. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Hello? Mrs. Vance." It was a woman's voice, young, nervous. "My name is Ethan Cole. I am a lawyer for the district attorney's office. I have been assigned to your case." "My case?" "The criminal case against your son and your daughter-in-law. After listening to the recordings and reviewing the evidence you presented today, the DA's office has decided to proceed with charges of attempted murder, aggravated fraud, criminal conspiracy, and several other crimes. I need to meet with you tomorrow to review all the evidence." "Of course," I replied. "At what time? Is 10 in the morning okay?" "At my office." We agreed on the details and hung up. Maggie appeared at the door of the room with 2 cups of hot tea. "Can't sleep?" she asked. It was the DA's office. "Are they going to prosecute Caleb and Jessica criminally?" Maggie nodded as she passed me a cup. "I imagined so. With the evidence you presented today, they had no choice." "This is going to be big, Eleanor." "Very big." "I know." I took a sip of tea. It was very hot, but I liked feeling something in my throat, which was dry from so much talking in court. "Maggie, there is something else I didn't say today." "What thing?" "I found evidence that Jessica killed Mr. Cooper in Texas. She poisoned him slowly with insulin, just like she planned to do to me, and she has everything documented, as if it were a trophy." Maggie sat heavily in the chair next to the bed. "My God, you have that evidence. Photographs of everything. But I didn't present them today because I want to give them directly to Prosecutor Cole. This goes beyond my case. Jessica needs to be investigated for murder in Texas. The families of her other victims deserve justice too." "You are right," agreed Maggie. "Tomorrow, when you meet with Prosecutor Cole, give him everything, every piece of evidence. Let us make sure Jessica Sandoval never hurts another elderly person again." We spent the rest of the night talking, remembering old times in the DA's office, the cases we won together, the victories we celebrated. It was comforting to remember who I was before all this. Not just a victim, not just a betrayed mother, but a woman who dedicated her life to justice. And although my own son had become the criminal I used to pursue, I was not going to stop now. I was going to make sure he and Jessica paid for everything. Not for revenge, but because it was the right thing to do. Because some things are more important than blood. Like the truth, like justice, like protecting other innocent people from predators like Jessica. Finally, near dawn, I fell asleep, and for the first time in 6 months, I slept without fear, without poisoned pills in my system, without murderers living under my roof, without having to fake dementia to protect my own life. I slept like the free woman I had become again. The next morning I woke up with the sun entering through the window of Maggie's guest room. For a moment, disoriented, I did not know where I was. Then everything came back like an avalanche. The court, the revelations, the arrest of Caleb and Jessica. Reality fell on me with all its weight. Maggie was already awake, making breakfast in the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee greeted me when I walked out of the room. "Good morning," she greeted me. "You have to eat something before going to the DA's office. It will be a long day." She was right. I ate little, barely some scrambled eggs and toast, but the coffee helped clear my head. At 9:30, Maggie drove me in her car to the district attorney's offices. The building was the same one where I had worked for 35 years. Walking in there after 6 years of retirement felt strange, like returning to a previous life. Prosecutor Ethan Cole turned out to be a young man of no more than 35 years, thin, with glasses, and a serious expression that reminded me of myself when I was young and hungry for justice. He received us in his office, which was cluttered with folders and documents piled everywhere. "Mrs. Vance, it is an honor to meet you," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "I have read about several of your cases. They are legendary in this office." "Thank you," I replied simply. I was not in the mood for professional nostalgia. "Let us get straight to the point," continued Ethan as he opened a recorder on his desk. "I need you to tell me everything from the beginning, every detail, however small it may seem, and I need all the evidence you have." Over the next 3 hours, I told him everything, from Robert's death to the moment I discovered the insulin syringes. I showed him the photographs, the recordings, the bank documents, the toxicological reports. Everything. Ethan took notes furiously, occasionally stopping me to ask specific questions. When I got to the part about the newspaper clippings I found in Jessica's closet, he stopped abruptly. "Wait! You are saying you have evidence that Miss Sandoval kept documentation on a possible prior homicide in Texas?" "Exactly," I replied. I took out my phone and showed him the photographs I had taken. "Here are all the clippings, with handwritten notes by her. It is as if she were studying her own crime to repeat it." Ethan looked at the photographs in silence for several minutes. His expression went from serious to absolutely indignant. "This is misuse. Vance, this is evidence of premeditated murder in another state. I need to contact the Texas District Attorney immediately. If we can prove she killed Mr. Cooper, we are talking about life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." "I hope so," I said with a firm voice, "because if I hadn't discovered her plan in time, I would be dead, and she would already be looking for her next victim." Ethan leaned back in his chair, taking off his glasses to rub his eyes. "In my 8 years as a prosecutor, I have never seen such a complete case. You did all the investigative work. You documented every step. You have more evidence than most cases that arrive at my desk after months of police investigation." 35 years of experience, I replied with a small, bitter smile. "I learned from the best, and I also learned from the mistakes of the criminals I prosecuted. I knew exactly what evidence I needed and how to obtain it legally." "Let us talk about your son," Ethan said cautiously. "I know this must be difficult for you, but I need to know. Do you believe he acted on his own initiative or was completely manipulated by Jessica Sandoval?" The question hit me in the chest. It was something I had asked myself hundreds of times over the last few weeks. At first, I wanted to believe Jessica manipulated him completely, I admitted. I wanted to believe my son was just a victim of an evil woman, but the truth is more complicated. Yes, Jessica seduced him, manipulated him, exploited his weaknesses. But Caleb made conscious decisions every step of the way. He signed the fake documents. He hired the fake nurse. He gave me the pills that kept me drugged. And when the time came to decide whether to go ahead with the plan to kill me, he said yes. My voice broke slightly on the last sentence. Ethan passed me a box of tissues he had on his desk. I didn't cry, but I held one in my hands just to have something to do with them. "I understand," Ethan said softly. "And I want you to know we are going to prosecute both cases with the full weight of the law. Jessica Sandoval will face charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, identity theft, and we are going to work with Texas for the murder charges. Your son will face charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, breach of trust, and several financial crimes." "How much time could they get?" I asked. "If we declare them guilty on all charges, Jessica could get life imprisonment. Your son is looking at between 25 and 40 years in prison." 40 years. Caleb was 43 years old. If he received the maximum sentence, he would leave prison an old man. if he left at all. There is something else you need to know, I said after a moment of silence. I think Jessica has more victims than we have identified. The cases in Texas, Arizona, and California are just the ones I could confirm. But a predator like that, with her level of sophistication, does not start from nothing. There are probably more. She needs to be investigated thoroughly in every state she has lived in. I agree, replied Ethan. I am going to contact the FBI. This type of fraud crossing state lines falls under federal jurisdiction. They have resources to do a complete investigation of her history. The meeting continued until past noon. We reviewed every piece of evidence, every testimony, every legal detail. Ethan explained the process that would follow: the arraignment, the preliminary hearing, the trial. He asked if I was prepared to testify, to face my son in criminal court. I am prepared, I assured him. I have testified in hundreds of cases. This will not be different, but we both knew that was a lie. This case was completely different, because this time, the defendant was my own blood. When we finally left Ethan's office, it was almost 3 p.m. Maggie was waiting for me in the hallway, glancing through some documents. How did it go? She asked. Ethan is going to proceed with all charges. He is also going to contact the FBI and the Texas DA. Jessica is going to face justice for everything she has done. Maggie nodded with satisfaction. Good. That woman deserves to rot in prison. She paused. And Caleb? Between 25 and 40 years, if declared guilty of everything. I said no more. There was no need. We left the DA's building and walked to Maggie's car. Outside, the day was sunny and warm. People walked by, laughing, living their normal lives. I felt disconnected from all that, as if I were watching the world through glass. I need to go to my house, I said suddenly. Are you sure? I thought you wanted to avoid it for a while. I need to face it. I need to enter that house and reclaim it again. I cannot let them steal it from me, too. They already took enough from me. Maggie understood. She drove in silence to my neighborhood. When we arrived at my street, I saw there was yellow police tape surrounding my house. Of course, it was a crime scene now, the site of an attempted murder. A police officer was standing at the entrance. He recognized me when I approached. Mrs. Vance, he said with respect. I regret to inform you that the house remains part of the active investigation. You cannot enter yet. How long? I asked. Probably another week. The forensic technicians need to finish processing the scene. I nodded. I did not argue. I understood the procedure. I stood in front of my house, looking at the windows that once gave me so much joy. The house where I raised my son. The house where I grew old with Robert. The house that almost became my tomb. I am going to get it back, I said in a low voice, more to myself than to anyone else. I am going to clean every trace of them. I am going to make it be my home again. I know, replied Maggie standing next to me, and I am going to help you. Betty, my neighbor, came out of her house at that moment. Upon seeing me, she ran toward me with eyes full of tears. Mrs. Vance, thank God you are okay. I have been so worried. When I saw the news, when I found out everything that happened, she hugged me tightly. I am okay, Betty, I assured her. Thanks to you, too. Your testimony was crucial. I should have realized sooner, she said between sobs. I should have done something when I saw they treated you so badly. It is not your fault. They were very good at hiding what they were really doing. We stood talking a while longer. Betty told me that other neighbors had also started to suspect, but no one knew what to do. I felt comforted knowing I hadn't been as alone as I thought. When we finally returned to Maggie's car, I looked at my house one last time. Soon I would return. Soon I would recover it. And when I did, I would be stronger than ever. Because I had survived. I had fought. And I had won. 3 weeks later, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. It was the moment the judge would decide if there was enough evidence to take the case to trial. Ethan Cole had called me the night before to prepare me. Tomorrow is going to be tough, he warned me. You are going to see your son for the first time since the arrest, and he is going to testify. His defense attorney is going to try to paint him as a victim of Jessica, as a desperate man who was manipulated. And Jessica, I asked, she has a different lawyer. They are going to present separate defenses, probably each blaming the other. It is the classic strategy when accomplices turn against each other. He was right. When I walked into the courtroom that morning, the tension was palpable. Caleb was sitting at a table with his defense attorney, an older man with gray hair named Ruben Torres, known for defending impossible cases. Jessica was at another table with her lawyer, a young and aggressive woman named Maribel Suarez. When Caleb saw me enter, he looked away immediately. Jessica, on the other hand, glared at me, as if all this were my fault and not the consequence of her own crimes. The presiding judge was different from the civil hearing. This was Judge Mario Delgado, a man of about 60 with a reputation for being extremely tough on crimes against the elderly. I had read about him in the newspapers during my years at the DA's office. I had never worked directly with him, but I knew he was fair and tolerated no nonsense. We will proceed with the preliminary hearing in the case of the state versus Caleb Vance and Jessica Sandoval, announced Judge Delgado. Prosecutor Cole, you may present your case. Ethan stood up and for the next hour presented a devastating summary of all the evidence. The audio recordings where Jessica and Caleb planned my death, the toxicological analysis of the pills, the insulin syringes, the forged financial documents, the testimonies of Valentine, the fake nurse, Betty's statements, everything. The room was in complete silence. Even the reporters filling the public benches seemed horrified by the details. When Ethan finished, Caleb's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, began Ruben Torres, my client does not deny he committed serious mistakes, but he was the victim of systematic manipulation by Jessica Sandoval. She seduced him, exploited his financial problems, and convinced him step by step to participate in this scheme. My client never would have done something like this on his own. He was a respected lawyer, a family man, until he met this woman. Lies, shouted Jessica from her table. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but she broke free. He was the one who sought me out. He told me his mother had money. He planned everything. Order, bellowed the judge, banging his gavel. Miss Sandoval, sit down and remain silent, or I will remove you from this courtroom. Jessica sat down, but her face was red with fury. Her lawyer, Maribel, stood up quickly, trying to control the damage. Your Honor, my client is under extreme emotional stress, but she is right about something. Caleb Vance is not the victim his lawyer pretends to paint. We have evidence that he contacted my client specifically because he knew of her experience in complex financial matters. Complex financial matters, repeated Ethan with disbelief. That is what you call murder and fraud now. Judge Delgado raised his hand. Enough. I am not going to allow this hearing to turn into a circus. Prosecutor Cole, do you have more evidence to present? Yes, Your Honor. I would like to call Mrs. Eleanor Vance to testify. My heart began to beat faster. I knew this moment would come, but nothing really prepared me to walk to that stand, take the oath, and sit in front of my son, knowing my testimony would send him to prison. Ethan started with basic questions. My name, my age, my relationship to the defendants. Then he started to dig deeper. Mrs. Vance, can you describe for the court what happened after your husband's death? I took a deep breath and began to tell the story. Every detail. How Caleb appeared with documents to sign, how they began to drug me, how they treated me as if I were senile, how I discovered their plan to kill me. While I spoke, I looked at Caleb. He kept his gaze fixed on the table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Sometimes I saw him swallow with difficulty. Other times it looked like he was holding back tears. Mrs. Vance, continued Ethan, at any moment did your son show remorse? Did he try to stop the plan? No, I replied with a clear voice. There was a moment, in one of the recordings, where he hesitated briefly, but Jessica convinced him quickly, and after that, he went ahead without hesitation. How did you feel when you discovered your own son planned to kill you? The question hit me like a punch. I had to take a moment before answering. I felt as if the son I raised had died, I finally said, as if a stranger had taken his place, because the boy I knew, the young man who swore to take care of me always, would never have done something like this. This man in front of me is not my son. He is a criminal who shares his face. I heard a stifled sob. Caleb had his head in his hands. His lawyer whispered something to him, but he did not respond. When Ethan finished, lawyer Ruben Torres approached for cross-examination. Mrs. Vance. He began with a soft, almost kind voice. You were a prosecutor for many years, correct? 35 years. An impressive career. You must have developed very specific skills. Skills to investigate, to find evidence, to build cases against defendants. That is correct. Is it not possible that you used those skills to exaggerate or misinterpret your son's actions? That you saw a crime where there was only a worried son trying to help his elderly mother? I looked him directly in the eye. I have recordings of them planning my murder. I have insulin syringes I found hidden in their room. I have toxicological analyses proving they drugged me systematically. What part of that is misinterpretation? Torres changed tactics. Your son was in a desperate financial situation. Is it not possible that Jessica Sandoval exploited that desperation? That she manipulated him until she turned him into something he never was? My son is a 43-year-old adult, I replied. He is a lawyer with a university education. He knows the law. He knows the difference between right and wrong. No one can force another person to plan a murder. That was his choice. And now he has to live with the consequences. There were no more questions after that. I stepped down from the stand and returned to my seat next to Maggie, who had been present throughout the hearing. Then it was the turn of Jessica's lawyer, Maribel Suarez. She called Jessica herself to testify, which surprised me. It was risky for a defendant to testify in a preliminary hearing. Jessica took the stand, looking very different from how I had seen her before. No makeup, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dressed in modest clothes, clearly trying to look like a victim. Miss Sandoval, began her lawyer, can you tell us how you met Caleb Vance? We met at a social event a year ago, replied Jessica with a trembling voice, very different from her usual tone. He was very charming. He told me about his mother, about how she was aging, and he was worried. I fell in love with him. Lies, all lies. But she was a good actress. And when did he start talking about the problems with his mother? Shortly after we started dating. He told me his mother was losing her memory, that she needed help. He asked me to help him take care of her. I just wanted to support the man I loved. At any point did you plan to harm Mrs. Vance? Never, exclaimed Jessica with tears in her eyes. Fake tears, perfectly calculated. I just followed Caleb's instructions. He told me what medicines to give her, what documents to sign. I trusted him. I thought we were doing what was best for his mother. It was an impressive show. If I hadn't had the recordings, if I hadn't seen the newspaper clippings of her previous victims, I almost could have believed her. But Ethan had those recordings, and when his turn came for cross-examination, he used them with surgical precision. Miss Sandoval, began Ethan with a cold voice, is it true that you have used at least 3 different names in the last 10 years? Jessica turned pale. That was for personal reasons. Is it true that you were married to Mr. William Cooper in Texas, who died under suspicious circumstances 6 months after your marriage? That has nothing to do with. Is it true that you kept newspaper clippings about Mr. Cooper's death? Clippings with notes written by you analyzing how you avoided an investigation. The silence in the room was absolute. Jessica opened and closed her mouth several times without being able to answer. Ethan continued, relentless. Is it true that in a recording we have in evidence, you tell Caleb Vance, and I quote, "This worked perfectly in Texas," unquote. What were you referring to with that, Miss Sandoval? Jessica broke. Completely. She started screaming, crying, accusing Caleb, the judge, me, everyone. You do not understand. That old woman had too much money. She didn't deserve it. I worked hard all my life and never had anything. It was fair that. Her lawyer tried to calm her, but it was too late. The damage was done. Judge Delgado banged his gavel repeatedly until Jessica finally fell silent. I have heard enough, he said with a hard voice. There is more than sufficient evidence to proceed to trial on all charges. The defendants will remain detained without right to bail until the trial. This hearing is adjourned. And just like that, it ended. Caleb and Jessica were handcuffed and led out of the room. My son did not look at me once as they took him away. Jessica kept shouting obscenities until her voice was lost in the distance. I remained seated, feeling a strange emptiness, I had won. Again. But this victory did not feel triumphant. It felt like a scar that would never heal completely. The full trial took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of devastating testimony, overwhelming evidence, and the slow public destruction of 2 people who had tried to destroy me first. The media covered every day, every detail. My face was on all the news. The retired prosecutor, who uncovered her own son's plot. A headline I never thought I would read. During those weeks, I had to hear things no mother should hear. Testimony from forensic experts explaining exactly how Jessica planned to kill me with the insulin syringes. Psychologists analyzing the coldness with which Caleb had drugged his own mother. FBI investigators presenting evidence that Jessica had been involved in the death of at least 3 other elderly people in different states. Every day was torture, but every day also reminded me why I was doing this. Not just for me, but for all of Jessica's victims. For Mr. Cooper in Texas, who died alone and scared. For Mrs. Mendoza in Arizona, who lost everything before her family could stop it. For all the vulnerable elderly people who could be the next victims if I didn't stop this predator now. On the day of the verdict, the room was completely full. Maggie was sitting next to me, holding my hand. Betty had come too, along with several neighbors who wanted to support me. Ethan Cole looked confident but tense. He knew we had presented a solid case, but juries are unpredictable. When the jury returned after deliberating for 2 days, the silence in the room was suffocating. The jury forewoman, a middle-aged woman with a serious expression, stood up with the verdict paper in her hands. In the case of the state versus Jessica Sandoval, she began with a clear voice. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Jessica let out a choked scream. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of aggravated fraud, guilty. On the charge of fraudulent administration, guilty. The list went on. Guilty on each and every charge. 17 in total. Then it was Caleb's turn. In the case of the state versus Caleb Vance, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. I saw my son close his eyes. A tear rolled down his cheek. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty. On the charge of aggravated fraud, guilty. On the charge of family breach of trust, guilty. Guilty on all charges as well. 15 in total. Judge Mario Delgado scheduled the sentencing for 2 weeks later. In that time, I had to make difficult decisions. Caleb's lawyer contacted me, asking if I would be willing to write a letter to the judge asking for clemency for my son, asking the judge to consider that Caleb had been manipulated, that he deserved a chance at redemption. I sat in Maggie's house for hours, staring at a blank sheet of paper. I tried to write something. I tried to find words that could save my son from decades in prison. But every time I picked up the pen, I remembered his laugh when we entered the courtroom that first day. I remembered the recordings where he planned my death with such coldness. I remembered the nights I spent drugged, confused, terrified in my own house. I did not write the letter. Some actions are beyond forgiveness. The day of sentencing arrived. Judge Delgado heard closing statements from both sides. Jessica's lawyer tried to argue that she deserved mercy, that she had a difficult childhood, that society had failed her. The judge listened in silence and then shook his head. "Miss Sandoval," he said with a hard voice, "you are a calculating predator who has left a trail of destruction through multiple states. You have shown zero remorse. You have tried to blame everyone except yourself. You represent a permanent danger to society, especially to our most vulnerable citizens." He paused. "For the crimes of which you have been found guilty, I sentence you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, you will be extradited to Texas to face murder charges in the case of William Cooper." Jessica screamed. She tried to get up, but the bailiffs held her down. She kept screaming as they dragged her from the room. This time, her screams were not acting. They were real desperation. Then it was Caleb's turn. His lawyer made a last attempt to appeal to the judge's clemency, arguing that my son had been a good person before meeting Jessica, that he deserved a second chance. Judge Delgado looked directly at Caleb. "Mr. Vance, you were not a desperate man who made a mistake in a moment of weakness. You systematically planned, for months, to murder your own mother. The woman who raised you, who educated you, who sacrificed everything for you. You did it for money, out of pure greed. Caleb kept his head down. However, continued the judge, I recognize that you have no prior criminal record, and I recognize that, although this does not excuse you, you were influenced by Jessica Sandoval. Therefore, my sentence will be somewhat less than hers. He made a dramatic pause. I sentence you to 35 years in prison, without the possibility of parole for 15 years. When you get out, if you get out, you will be an old man. You will be the age your mother is now. Maybe then you will understand what you tried to take from her. 35 years. Caleb was 43. He would get out at 78, if he lived that long. His whole life, wasted. The bailiffs approached to take him away, but before they touched him, Caleb turned to me. For the first time in the entire trial, he looked me directly in the eyes. "Mom," he said with a broken voice, "I am sorry. I am sorry for everything. I know I do not deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I am sorry." I looked at him in silence for a long moment. Part of me wanted to run to him, hug him, tell him I forgave him. But another part, the part that had survived his betrayal, stood firm. "I am sorry too," I finally replied. "I am sorry the son I raised is dead. I am sorry you allowed greed to destroy everything good in you. I am sorry you chose money over your own mother." I paused. "But more than anything, I am sorry you never really knew the woman who gave you life. Because if you had known her, if you had understood who I really was, you never would have attempted this." They took him away after that. I left the courtroom with Maggie by my side. Outside, the reporters waited for me with their cameras and microphones. This time I did not run from them. "Mrs. Vance, how do you feel after the sentencing?" I took a deep breath. I feel relieved that justice has been done. I feel sad for the son I lost. But mostly, I feel grateful to be alive. And I hope my story serves as a warning to other seniors who may be in similar situations. Never let anyone, not even your own family, make you feel helpless. There is always a way to fight. 2 months later, I was finally able to return to my house. The police had finished with the investigation. I hired a professional cleaning company to clean every corner. I donated or threw away everything Jessica and Caleb had left. I repainted the walls. I changed the furniture. I turned their room into an office. The house felt different now. Smaller without Robert. Quieter without the weight of betrayal. But it was mine again. Betty and other neighbors came to help me resettle. Maggie stayed with me the first few weeks until I felt comfortable being alone again. Little by little, I rebuilt my life. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter. It was from a woman in Florida named Maribel Santos. She told me her mother had been the victim of a similar scheme to the one Jessica attempted with me. Thanks to my case, to all the publicity it received, she had recognized the signs in time. She had saved her mother and had managed to get the scammers arrested. "You saved my mother," she wrote. "Your courage gave us the strength to fight." That letter was the first of many. I received dozens of letters from families who had used my story to protect their elderly loved ones. Some asked for advice. Others just wanted to thank me for speaking publicly. I realized my battle had not been just for me. It had been for all of them, too. Now, when I sit in my garden in the afternoons, looking at the flowers I planted where Robert used to sit and read the newspaper, I think about everything that happened. I think about how close I came to losing everything. And I think about the strength I found inside me, that same strength that made me a feared prosecutor decades ago. I am 71 years old. I survived an attempted murder by my own son. I lost my family, but I recovered my life. And although the pain never disappears completely, I have found peace in knowing that I fought, that I did not give up, that I did not allow them to turn me into a victim. I am Eleanor Vance. I was a district attorney for 35 years. And when my own son tried to destroy me, I reminded the world that some women simply cannot be defeated. This is my story, a story of betrayal, survival, and justice. And I hope it serves to remind everyone that it is never too late to fight for what is right. Never.